I'm showing the screen. We have Charlie Finch Finley on the stream right here. That's who you can see right there. So let me change the audio here. Give me a second, gents, so I can internal speakers. Okay, Cameron, are you there, Brother Beast?
Yeah, I'm here, man. Thanks for having me on. I'm a fan of the show.
Yeah. Okay. I really appreciate that. Let me make sure that we're all good because we're experimenting for the first time here with. Okay, I want you to say something. Say anything.
Morning.
Morning. Perfect. Just had to make sure that audio bar went up there. Okay. Um, okay. You're welcome to share your video if you'd like. But feel free not to. So let me do a quick intro here. We have Cameron Smith. Let me get my notes on the matter here. Really appreciate you coming on, brother. He is a police officer at a large West Coast police agency. And let's just set the record straight here that he's not speaking on behalf of his agency that he works at. He's speaking on behalf of himself and what he's seeing. So Cameron, I wanted to bring you on because there's a lot of things happening with COVID-19. There's a lot of fallout, if you will, that I like to call it, and I think a lot of stuff is getting not swept under the rug, but just isn't getting the coverage because we're talking about deaths, we're talking about the numbers, we're talking about global things, and we're not seeing what this is actually like in the homes of individuals. So can you tell us what you're seeing as boots on the ground, what you're seeing with some of the effects of COVID-19 and how it affects you doing your job?
Yeah, absolutely. So the pandemic has had a large effect on police work and kind of the day-to-day operations of frontline employees and first responders. And that's both in what we're seeing out on the streets and how we respond to it. I think the first and the biggest thing is domestic violence. Calls for domestic violence are way up across the board. It's already one of the most common calls that we respond to. And now it's off the charts. You have people cooped up together that are not normally in each other's faces the way they are now. People are unable to access their normal coping mechanisms by going out and doing whatever they do to calm down and de-escalate a situation. You also have record amounts of alcohol being consumed kind of across the country, and these factors together really make for a kind of dangerous and volatile situation in your average home. It's really a shame, and it's something that I wish more people were aware of, and something that I wish more people were aware of. One, just because it's an important topic, but also because I think if people were understanding of that, they might be able to kind of head that off in their own homes. It's an intensely personal sort of situation, and I hope people would take the time and make the effort to avoid that problem before they find themselves in that sort of situation.
Absolutely. Now, something that just popped in my head, brother, is this affecting your kind of take on, there's the big debate about right now about opening up the country, right? What time should we do it? How should we do it? Is this, in your mind, is this something that would that you think should be discussed in the debate of, listen, this lockdown actually is bad in other ways. Yes, we need to defeat the virus, but also it's causing these other issues that we need to address. So does that affect your the way you think about the lockdown and how we should open up?
I think it's a factor, definitely. I don't think that it is by itself a reason to open up early. We're seeing a lot of other COVID-related issues that are not directly related to the virus. Another one is suicides. We've been getting a big increase in like a 40% increase in suicide-related calls, and those aren't necessarily completed suicides, but those are people calling crisis line or other people calling the police saying like, "Hey, my friend, family member, or whatever has been making some concerning statements. Can you go check on them?" There are associated issues with COVID and with the widespread stay-at-home orders, widespread job loss that do need to be taken into account. But I think on their own, I think death is probably a more serious concern than those. I think those issues are
Totally.
manageable. They're logistics issues, essentially. Right. Throwing the correct resources at the right time at that can mitigate a lot of those. And for the virus more generally, I think the stay-at-home orders are the correct resource to throw at that to try and mitigate that. So it's something that we try and manage as opposed to a reason to open up
Right.
in themselves.
Got it. So I want to ask you also about given COVID-19, how is it affecting your ability to do your job? So when you do these house calls, and we'll talk about some of the other things that we riffed on about, about the social services for the homeless and some of that stuff that's basically on hold. We'll riff on that next. But I'm curious, when you go to a house, are you wearing a mask? Are you social distancing? Is it hard for you to do your job if you can't be within 6 feet of someone? How do you manage that?
The nature of police work and the nature of work for first responders, it makes social distancing impossible. It's human contact. You have to have in-person contact, and sometimes you're actually putting hands on people to put them in handcuffs. We have some PPE. We have gloves. We have like surgical masks. We were issued one N95 mask to last kind of indefinitely. But sometimes you go into like an at-home death call with somebody who dies at home, not under a doctor's care. The police go out to that to investigate, to make sure it's not a suspicious death, a murder, that sort of thing. And for those, we've been directed to wear our gas masks. So it's like, wow, that's what we'd use for crowd control or fires. It's effective in protecting against the virus, but it's not effective for communication or for helping people. The image of a police officer in a gas mask showing up at your house is not it doesn't
Right.
say I'm here to help.
Right.
It makes things more difficult, certainly.
God, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, it's people. Given your occupation, when you show up, people are already going to be on edge. Throw a gas mask on there, and it's gonna really heighten the situation.
Nobody calls the police just to say everything's going great, high fives, and get out of there.
Right, exactly.
It's always a tense situation already.
Right. So, can you talk for a second about what you're seeing with the social services right now that are what's the effect of COVID-19 on these?
They're essentially non-existent. They've essentially come to a screeching halt, and that's really unfortunate for everybody. For domestic violence, there are domestic violence advocates that'll come out and help victims and connect them with resources. For the homeless, there are all sorts of mental health, drug treatment, and housing services that are completely on hold. Also related to homeless issues, there are social services that help clean up homeless camps when they pop up and get out of control. Social services will go to those camps, try to offer resources, and then for the people who don't take them up on the offer of the resources, they clean the camps, and the people have to move. They pick up the needles and the associated quality of life issues, the urine, feces, trash, that sort of thing. All of that is on hold. So the social services are not reaching the people that need it most, and they're not mitigating the quality of life effects that are felt by people who are now stuck at home all over the place. It's really a shame.
Got it. And is the reason that those things are on hold right now, is it strictly because is the calculus that they think that'll stop the spread more than actually having these social services enacted will stop the spread, or what's the thinking there, to your knowledge?
Well, we started trying to do that. We, being city governments, tried to have as much of that done remotely as possible early on in this. But at this point, most of those workers are furloughed. If they were working for the government, they're gone, and that's due to just tanking incomes that city governments are getting. Most cities are stretched to the extreme, trying to pay for all of their essential employees as it is, and it's hard cuts to get rid of social services. But a lot of those people are not union represented, and city governments are only paying what they're absolutely required to at this point because they're broke.
Got it. And you can just tell me that if you don't, I might be getting out a little bit out of your area of expertise here, but why is it that the funds are drying up for these things specifically? Is it because there's the tax? Is it a sales tax thing? Where is this revenue that was here, that was coming into the city, that's now not? Like, I'm just trying to understand what is mostly responsible for funding these things.
Yeah, it's economic activity. So it's all the shuttered businesses, it's all the closed hotels, it's tourism tax, it's those revenue streams that have just gone. Most city, I mean, every city is different, but most of them have a rainy day fund, and they're just burning through that. And they're looking at uh, their payroll for the rest of the year, for the next 6 months, and they realize they just cannot pay for anything that is not absolutely essential without economic activity starting back up.
Got it. Got it. I appreciate you weighing in on that. Now, can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing besides the domestic, besides the house call stuff? What are you seeing out in the streets in terms of how is COVID-19 affecting your ability to give people citations, arrest people? What is that like? What's the fallout there?
Yeah, so there's a big concern about introducing the virus into captive populations, specifically in my area. That means bringing infected people into jail, where that population it would be disastrous if it got in there. And as a result, the crimes that we actually arrest people for have decreased sharply. It's essentially all property crimes are now a cite in lieu, which means that if you catch somebody committing a property crime, that's like shoplifting, breaking into cars, burglarizing property, breaking into detached garage or a shed or something like
Right.
that, stealing bikes, all of that stuff is a ticket. You just write somebody a ticket with their court date and then send them on their way. And that is it's very frustrating for police certainly, but also for community members. If you just caught somebody breaking into your garage and the police show up and arrest them, and then they just write them a ticket and send them on their way, it's incredibly frustrating for the community. And what you see is it gives the impression that there are no consequences, and it's like a free for all out there
Right.
with property crimes. You'll catch somebody, shoplifting or or stealing a bike, and you arrest them, and they've got two or three other criminal citations in their pocket, and you let them go, and they're just going a few blocks away to continue stealing stuff. It's
Right.
Yeah,
Now,
again, it's another bit of fallout
are
from
you
this.
are you seeing an increase in these crimes?
Absolutely.
Wow.
These kind of low level property crimes are increasing dramatically. Well, it stands to reason. If all the
Right.
people that are committing property crimes are still out and about, they're going to continue to commit property crimes.
Right. Now, I'm curious. Do you think it's the right move? Did this strategy of a cite in lieu rather than arrest them? What's your opinion on the matter?
I don't think it's the right move. I think it's a mistake. I understand that introducing COVID into jails is a real concern. But again, it's a logistics issue. I don't think that leaving people out on the street to continue to commit crimes is correct. And we've got to find a different solution. We're putting up temporary hospitals, we're putting up temporary shelters, we're putting up temporary housing. Why can't we do something like that for people who need to be incarcerated for a short period of time? It's uh, it's a burden for already overstrapped city governments, but not doing it puts that burden back onto the population, and I don't think that's appropriate.
Right. Now, I'm curious because I think this is something I heard about it initially when shit was first starting to hit the fan with COVID, but that's kind of died down, and a lot of other stuff is taking precedence on cable news, even just newspaper coverage. What are you seeing this? Is it mainly in your jurisdiction where you're seeing this, or are you? Is this also? Is this a widespread national thing, or is it specific to you? I'm just curious because I don't know the extent to which this is a problem.
Yeah, so there is no such thing as like a national best practices for police departments. It's just not a thing, and some of that is due to the very different needs of different communities that are served all over the country.
Right.
So I can't speak for everybody. The West Coast is generally all on the same page, and so kind of up and down the West Coast, uh, this is pretty standard for everybody in the West Coast.
Right. Is there anything else that you're seeing that your police department or maybe others are doing that you think should be done differently?
I think the biggest thing is not arresting people when they're caught committing crimes
Right,
is a problem. I think it erodes public trust
right,
and it erodes confidence in government institutions.
right. Absolutely. Um, I'm also curious. What is your opinion on people's during this time their First Amendment rights to organize? Now we're seeing this a lot. I think Michigan is the kind of the headline state on where you're seeing these protests take place. People petitioning their government to open things up again. I'm curious where you stand on that.
In general, I think that people have the right to protest. I think free speech is an important fundamental right, and I fully support that. We as law enforcement have a duty to protect and support those rights for everybody, even when the content is unsavory for most people. Um, Specifically with the people who are protesting against the stay-at-home orders, I think there is another issue of they're making people unsafe, or they could be making people unsafe by doing that. And I think in the media coverage, they are treating it like this is the first time we've ever run across this sort of issue, and it's not. There's actually a fair amount of case law having to do with uh, when, where, and how people can protest if to make sure that that is safe for everybody. The question is, when does your right to protest infringe on somebody else's rights? And you manage that with something called time, place, and manner restrictions. That means that the local government can impose restrictions on when, where, and how somebody can protest to make sure that it's safe. I think that those people absolutely have the right to protest and to petition their government for what they see as an incorrect move. But I think local governments need to be more aggressive in how they let that happen. Is they need to leave an alternative channel for people to protest, but like blocking the streets, blocking traffic in front of a hospital puts people at risk in a really very real way. And that's not an appropriate way to get your message out and to hear and to petition your government. So there's room for people to exercise their rights without endangering others. You just have to find that balance.
Totally. I think that was an excellent rundown of it. I think too often people are when people speak about this, it's kind of either it's either one or the other. They say either, oh, of course they have the right to do this, which I personally err. I think the First Amendment is the greatest thing in modern government in the last few hundred years. I think it's amazing. But then you have people on the other side that say no, of course they shouldn't be able to do this. Like we need to mitigate COVID-19 as much as possible. Well, as with a lot of things, it's actually I think it's somewhere in the middle. So I appreciate you giving that rundown. I want to know, do you have what's your biggest worry right now as a police officer?
So my biggest worry is that the problem with the virus is actually larger and more widespread than we realize.
Right.
And I'm taking this from what I mentioned a little earlier is a big increase in at-home deaths. So uh, what we're seeing with frontline workers, firefighters, police, EMT are seeing is that the death toll, the amount of people dying right now is way higher than it's being reported as it's way higher than normal and way higher than it's being reported as connected to COVID. And actually this week, the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, ABC, NBC all put out separate articles kind of on this topic. And they're looking at normal trends for, its death certificates being issued at this time of year. They're looking at it with COVID-related deaths, and the death certificates are still way higher, sometimes like 40 to 50% higher than you would expect with the COVID deaths plus the normal period. And the issue really boils down to inadequate testing, both for the living and the dead. It's without more testing, we don't really know how bad the problem is in the hotspots. And there are probably places that are not currently considered hotspots that are. My concern, the thing that really worries me, is that while we're trying to determine, where, when, and how to reopen, the disconnect between how many people we think are dying from this and how many people actually are is going to lead us to an incorrect conclusion. And because of that, we're going to blunder into a second, more serious wave and end up having to re-implement or extend these stay-at-home orders longer than we otherwise would have.
Got it. Testing, testing, testing. Now we do have our next guest coming on in a few minutes, but so Martin, I appreciate you coming on. But and I think you just answered this question, but I'm curious if it's different. And I love asking my guests this question usually at the end, and that's do you think there's something that the media, well, I guess in this case you thought the media was getting that right by reporting Washington Post, New York Times, ABC, as you said, we're getting that information out there. Is there something else that you think either the mainstream, the conventional media, or kind of the zeitgeist, the way people talk about this issue, is there something that you think people are getting wrong? Now that could be either talk around the dinner table, it could be talk on the news. Is there some like major overarching thing that you think you wish people understood about this issue?
Yeah, definitely. There's something. It's kind of about police work more broadly, but it certainly has implications for this crisis. The biggest issue is that I wish people recognized all law enforcement is local. There's something like 18,000 different law enforcement agencies around the country, and each one of them is a completely separate entity. They all have, different hiring standards, training policies, training programs, policies and procedures, organization and leadership. And even agencies that are geographically close to each other are not necessarily operating in the same way at all. I get people that say, I saw this video of a cop somewhere in the world, or,
right,
police in Hong Kong dealing with protesters. Like, what's going on with that? And it's like, well, the answer is I don't know, because that's completely separate agency. Their operations really have nothing to do with any other agency. And the real takeaway from that is that every community has a say in how they are policed. And they do that through their local elections. County sheriffs, district attorneys, mayors, city councils, county commissioners, these elected positions provide structural and organizational direction for their local agencies. So I would hope that people become more engaged with their local elections and realize the huge ability that they have to have their interest reflected in their local communities. And as this is an election year, I hope that people are focusing not just on the big national elections, but pay close attention to those smaller local races, because they have a huge impact on your daily life.
You running for sheriff, brother?
Chief Smith, 2040.
Yeah, there we go, brother. Okay. Cameron, really appreciate you coming on. That was level, measured analysis, which I think is missing from a lot of things. So I appreciate not only the work you do, but other folks in law enforcement right now, because you really are your boots on the ground right now. You're kind of keeping this whole, one of the pillars keeping this whole fabric of society alive right now. So really appreciate everything that you're doing, and thanks for coming on. I hope we can talk again soon, brother. Thanks so much.
Absolutely, man. Have a good day.
Okay. Peace.